Hello, you've made it to skill 6 and we're ready to start putting together the bassoon and practicing taking it apart before we actually start playing. You've already made some great sounds, I'm sure, but we want to make sure that we're going to safely put the instrument together and take it apart so we don't damage anything. The first thing we want to do is make sure our case is on a flat surface, somewhere safe to open it. Mine is on the ground on my left. I'm going to make sure that I have the handle side of the case down for when I unlatch the latches, or unzip the zippers if I had a case with zippers. Once it's open, the first couple times we do this, we want to take a picture of the layout of our case. Every case is going to be slightly different, and we don't want to be confused and putting things wrong back in the case when we're done. So take a picture. Generally speaking, there's going to be a place for our tenor and bass joints touching, and this is actually usually the way they're going to be set up when the instrument is put together. There's also a place for our boot and our bell, and usually underneath somewhere are our vocals. There are also often pockets for our seat strap and swab and our reed case. The first thing we do when we're actually putting it together, now that we've taken a picture or memorized where everything goes, is we're going to take our seat strap, and if it's rolled up, we unravel it. Mine has a hook, yours might have a cup or a clip. No matter which that is, we want the hook on our right side. So for me, that's this way. It's going to go under our thighs and on our seat. So our hook's going to be dangling off the right side. Then we can grab our boot joint, which is this guy. We have a pancake key, and there are two holes on top. We'll want, from the user's perspective, the larger hole on our left. So if you were to look at yours, it should look like that. But I'm going to have it larger hole on my left, and at this point I usually place the boot between my legs on the chair in front of me. Imagine that's on my chair. The next joint we want to take is our tenor joint, and we're actually going to place that in. So this is going to go, we have one pad hanging off one side and an extra key hanging off on the other side. We're going to take this side, it may have cork, it may have a string, and put that in the smaller hole, which was on our right. Things we want to watch out for are making sure that this key doesn't hit any of the extra key work or the inside of the instrument. If I push it here, that's going to bend that rod very quickly. So we want to make sure that we're following the shape of our tenor joint. This wing is why it's also called the wing joint. This wing is going to follow the curvature of the larger hole. As we're doing this, I like to grab near the top, putting some pressure on the keys that are already closed. These guys live closed, so if I put my fingers there, it's not going to do anything. The other thing that we could do is just make sure we're holding onto the wood. Try to avoid grabbing this rod, because that will bend and destroy that. Anywhere lower, same thing. These rods are very long and far off the instrument and will bend very easily. Same thing on the boot joint. I grab wood side on both sides. So I'm lining up that wing with the larger hole, and the tenor joint goes in the smaller hole. Small twists and turns. We'll get that all the way in. We should have that all the way down. This key that was hanging off the side should be over another key mechanism that was on our boot joint. That can all happen sitting on your lap or on a seat right in front of you. We're going to do the same idea with our bass joint next. This one has a lot less key work than our tenor joint did, so it's going to be a lot easier to find somewhere to grab. We have a smaller side and a larger side. The larger side is going to go on top, and the smaller side is going to go into our boot joint. You might remember from our picture earlier, these are actually all going to be our left thumb keys. So those are going to line up. And this is again a situation where we want to make sure that we're not placing the body parts in correctly or incorrectly, because these keys will get bent out of shape, as will our thumb keys. So I'm going to make sure everything's lined up and twist and turn that in. You may have to give a slight adjustment to your tenon joint at that point, depending on how perfectly you aligned it in the first place. But when our bass joint is in correctly, we'll have all of these keys lined up like that, but facing you. If I hadn't moved anything, this would have all been facing me. At this point, it might be helpful to take this whole contraption, holding by the bass, or the boot joint rather, the boot joint, lifting that and placing that on the floor between your feet, because our next joint we're adding is our bell, and that's going to go right here. So we take our bell. This one has one key on it, and we want to press that as we're attaching it, because we have this bridge key, and that's going to line up, and if it's not pressed, it might catch that key, especially if we're accidentally pressing something on our bass joint. So I'm going to always press this bottom key on my bell as I attach it to the rest of my bassoon. And this is close to eye level because our boot is on the ground. Our next item is our bocal. This has a couple curvatures to it, but also has one cork side and one non-cork side. Our cork side is what's going to go into the hole on our tenor joint. This, again, we want to be careful not to be pressing keys, because that can close, which will then shred that pad. So just more things to be safe about. I'm grabbing this bocal, placing it in, and trying to grab as close to the cork as possible, and giving some twists and turns, small twists, to get the bocal in all the way. If I grab here, I'm going to give more pressure this way, and that's going to bend the bocal and change the sound of the bassoon. So as close to the cork as possible, and it's, for our bassoon in general, it's going to be pushed in all the way, so we shouldn't see any cork. Our alignment here should be that when I get this pad pressed, it should cover the hole that is in this little nub in our bocal. And mine looks correct right now. So now we have the whole bassoon basically put together. I'm going to grab from the top of my boot joint, still trying to avoid grabbing key work, and I'm going to take that at the bottom, since I have a hook or a clip on my seat strap. I'm going to make sure that I can see where these clips are going. If you have a cup, the whole bassoon's just going to go in that cup, like that. But I'm going to take this side, put it into the hook on my right. And when I lean it across, we'll talk about the holding position later. But that's basically how we're going to put the bassoon together and get it to where we want it to be. If we were to want to play, we would take that reed that's been soaking in our water cup and stick it on bocal like we did in our first sounds video. Our disassembly is going to be the exact same thing in reverse. Reed comes off. We can take the whole thing off from our seat strap, making sure we're grabbing from the boot joint. If we're grabbing higher, there's a chance that the boot joint will fall out from our tenor and bass joint, and then we'll have to get that fixed, and that could be quite costly. So I'm grabbing from the boot joint, unclipping or unhooking depending on what you have for a seat strap. I'm placing the bottom of the boot back on the ground in front of me. As I take out my bocal, same thing, grabbing as close to the cork as possible, twisting and turning, getting it out, watching for our pad there to not get ripped off. That goes back in our case, right where we found it. Bell comes off the same way it went on, pressing that pad down, twisting and turning. Next thing to come out is going to be our bass joint, which you can do either from the floor or from your lap or the chair between your legs. This is again going to be small motions of twisting and turning to save these keys and these keys from getting destroyed by our wing joint. Small twists and turns gets that out. And that goes back in. Then obviously we need to separate our tenor joint from our boot. Again, watching out for this key work that's hanging off the side. And again, always looking out for the rods that we're not grabbing any of those. Small twists and turns, get the tenor joint out, put back where we found it. Got these thumb keys lined up again. And our boot back where we found it. If you've actually played it, we'll talk about swabbing our bocal, our tenor joint, and our boot joint in another video. Practice doing the assembly and disassembly a couple times just to make sure you know exactly where everything goes and you're not bending any of the key work.